laser plasma displays flickered to life across the command center as the distant Aroxy Prime pulsed unnaturally in the corner of the room. Its once constant light now flickered erratically, sending waves of strange energy through the ship's fragile hull. Ambassador Krylov's 4 eyes blinked rapidly, the unsettling glow from the dying star reflecting in his gaze. He turned to face his council, his body taut with stress, as the alarms in the background rang loudly. "The containment measures have failed," said Science Director Venra, her voice deadpan despite the monumental gravity of her words. "Our sun will reach nova phase within 1 planetary cycle." Krylov's skin shifted from deep purple to a pale, almost ghostly blue, a visible sign of the fear that coursed through the Aroxy population. Around him, the 12 members of the High Council hunched forward, their slender forms mirroring the weight of the decision that loomed ahead. Even their once proud postures seemed to bend under the pressure of impending extinction. "We have evacuated 3 million citizens to the outer colonies," Defense Minister Zintel stated, her words sharp with a sense of finality. "But the outer worlds cannot support our entire population. The resource calculations are definitive. Total social collapse will occur within 6 cycles." A deep silence fell over the chamber, broken only by the faint hum of machinery that seemed to echo the growing sense of doom. Krylov closed his lower set of eyes, a gesture of profound thought, before his voice cut through the tension. "We must look beyond our system," he said. "We must break our oldest law." A soft trill of shock echoed in the chamber, the members of the council reacting with a mixture of disbelief and resignation. For 10,000 years, the Aruki had observed other worlds, chronicling their evolution, but never once had they broken their sacred directive of non-interference. Their studies had documented countless developing civilizations, but the Aruki had remained silent observers, never engaging. Krylov's eyes narrowed, and he stood with the weight of his decision pressing on his shoulders. "Our children will not survive otherwise." The council members, after what felt like an eternity of silent deliberation, voted. It was unanimous. The Aruki would reach out to another species for help. "Which civilization should we contact?" asked Venera, her tone cautious. With a deep breath, Krylov summoned a holographic display, one that shimmered with the glowing orb of Earth, swirling clouds of white wrapping around a deep blue planet. "This one," he said, pointing to the Earth. "The humans. They are young, still new to space travel, but they show remarkable adaptability and compassion. They also show violence and division," he warned. "Yes," said Krylov, his voice steady despite the uncertainty in his eyes. "But they overcome these divisions when faced with great challenges. Our studies show that, above all, they value saving lives." A murmur ran through the council as reluctant approval was given. Within hours, the most advanced communication array in the Urxi system powered up, aimed its vast dishes toward Earth, and sent a desperate message across 17 light-years of space. Alan Fisher yawned as he stared at the flickering display in the quiet control room of the Deep Space Communication Array. Outside, the Nevada desert sprawled in darkness, an endless sea of black. The late-night shift had taken its toll, and as the clock ticked past 3:47 a.m., Alan fought to stay awake. The massive radio dishes outside rotated with the relentless precision of a machine built to pierce the void of space. Another sip of bitter coffee hit his tongue and he grimaced, eyes flickering over to monitor 3. Wait, something was off. A pattern, unlike anything he had seen before, pulsed through the screen. At first he thought it was a glitch, a simple fault in the system, but the pattern repeated, unmistakably clear and deliberate. This wasn't just some random noise. He sat up straighter, his fingers flying over the keyboard to reroute 2 more dishes for confirmation. The pattern grew stronger. "This can't be right," he mumbled, his pulse quickening. His hand shook as he reached for the phone, dialing Dr. Samantha Wells, his supervisor. She picked up groggily. "Fisher, what is it?" Her voice was thick with sleep. "Look at this," Alan said, pointing to the screen. "The signal's not random. It repeats exactly every 47 seconds. Samantha rubbed her eyes, a sigh escaping her lips. But then her irritation shifted to focus as she observed the data. Her fingers danced over the console, pulling up coordinates. "Where's it coming from?" she asked, already sensing the magnitude of the discovery. "HD 83,443. 17 light-years away." Alan replied, his voice a mix of disbelief and excitement. "There's no way this is a glitch. It's structured, and it's real." Without another word, Dr. Wells moved quickly to make the necessary calls, setting off a chain of events that would change everything. By noon, the Deep Space Communication Array had become a hive of activity. The FBI had arrived first, followed by officials from NASA and the Pentagon. A small army of coders, scientists, and linguists gathered to study the signal. Professor George Mitchell, a linguist from MIT, stood at the center of the chaos, his hair disheveled, his suit wrinkled from travel. He scanned the array of data in front of him before speaking. "It's definitely a language," he said, his voice rough but authoritative. "Not based on any known Earth language, but it follows clear patterns, words or phrases, almost certainly." "Time frame to decode?" a military general barked. "Decades," Mitchell responded with a grim chuckle. "But there's something interesting here. The message includes mathematical sequences, prime numbers, pi, the Fibonacci sequence. Whoever sent this, they want to be understood. They're giving us a key." "A key?" Dr. Wells asked, incredulous. "Yes," Mitchell continued, his fingers tracing the intricate patterns on the display. "They've built more complex ideas on foundations we already understand." For the next 3 days, teams worked tirelessly around the clock. The government kept the discovery under wraps, but the tension and excitement were palpable as the world slowly began to grasp the enormity of what had been uncovered. Alan stayed on site, assisting the scientists to focus the array for the clearest signal possible. Then, on the 4th day, Mitchell rushed into the conference room, his eyes wide with exhilaration. "We've got it." The room fell silent as he held up his tablet, showing the breakthrough. "The message," he began, his voice filled with awe, "is from a civilization calling themselves the Aruki. Their star is dying, going nova much faster than they predicted. They need our help to evacuate their population." A hush filled the room. The implications were enormous. Actual aliens, asking for human help. The world had just become much larger. "Why us?" a general asked, his brow furrowed with skepticism. "If they're advanced enough to send signals across light years, why do they need us?" Mitchell paused, adjusting his glasses. "Their technology has limits," he explained. "Their ships can't travel fast enough to evacuate everyone in time. They believe humans might have solutions they haven't thought of." The room went quiet. The enormity of the decision settled in, and the world held its breath. Would humanity answer the call? The air in the war room was thick with anticipation. The task before Earth was monumental. Design a spacecraft capable of traversing light years to save an entire alien civilization. The message from the Iruki had sparked a chain reaction that no one had anticipated, least of all Captain Lucas Grant. Standing before a massive heads-up display, Lucas's gaze swept across the complex blueprints and data that flickered across the screen. The ship they would send to the Iruki system was named Horizon, but the name felt too optimistic for what lay ahead. The design was still in its infancy, and every detail had to be meticulously reworked to handle the immense challenges of faster-than-light travel. The Horizon wasn't just a ship. It was humanity's final hope to deliver a lifeline across an impossibly vast distance. Chief Engineer Paul Carter stood beside the display, his eyes scanning the schematics with quiet intensity. He ran his hand through his unkempt hair, a habit born from years of stress. "We're still dealing with fundamental issues," he muttered under his breath. "The FTL drives we're looking to adapt don't even come close to what's needed to travel 17 light-years. Lucas turned to him, his voice measured but firm. "Make it work, Paul. You've had a year to think about this. Now we need results." Paul nodded, the weight of the task heavy on his shoulders. It wasn't just the drive systems they were adapting. Every piece of the ship, from the life support systems to the hull's shielding, needed redesigning. The technology they had was still in its experimental phase. No one had ever attempted to break the light-speed barrier before. The Aruki had sent their distress call. Earth had answered. But Lucas knew they were stepping into unknown territory, and the horizon might very well be humanity's first and last attempt to save another species. The sound of footsteps echoed in the room as Lieutenant Sarah Hayes, the mission's logistics coordinator, entered with a tablet in hand. Her expression was stoic, but Lucas could see the pressure weighing on her as she delivered the latest round of grim news. "We've received the latest resource allocations. We're looking at a 3-month window to launch. That's the only window the UN will give us. If we miss it, the evacuation will be delayed indefinitely." Lucas took the tablet from her and flicked through the data. The numbers were troubling. The Horizon's design was still in the conceptual stage, and Earth was already fighting time to complete construction and testing. And that was before considering the unforeseen difficulties they might face once they arrived in the Aruki system. "Set up a meeting with the Global Resource Committee. Tell them we're cutting it close," Lucas said. His mind raced, but his exterior remained calm. His years of military strategy had taught him to compartmentalize, focus on the immediate task, plan for the unexpected, and always keep the morale of his team high. He turned back to Paul, who was busy running diagnostics on the ship's power core. The chief engineer looked up from his terminal, his face drawn with fatigue. "I've been working on the FTL drive theory for over 15 years, Lucas. We're working with incomplete data, but the math checks out. We can build this. We just need more time." "Time is the one thing we don't have," Lucas replied, his voice hardening. "We need to move faster, Paul. The Aruki system won't wait for us to catch up. The longer we delay, the more people we lose." The conversation was interrupted by a sharp beep from the display. Lucas glanced over at it, his brow furrowing. The screen showed an incoming transmission, a laser plasma signal from one of the Earth's monitoring stations confirming their trajectory and current velocity. Lucas tapped the display, bringing up the data for the mission's launch sequence. The numbers rolled out before him, painting a stark picture of the odds they were facing. A ship capable of making the jump to the Aruki system wasn't just about speed. It was about sustaining life for months in deep space, with no communication, no support, and only a handful of humans on board to make impossible decisions. As the team continued working, Lucas could feel the burden of command pressing down on him. This wasn't just a military mission, it was a race against time. A test of humanity's ability to adapt and innovate under the most extreme pressure. 2 weeks later, Lucas stood in the dry desert air, squinting up at the horizon's skeletal frame. The ship had taken shape quicker than anyone expected, though it was far from finished. Workers swarmed around it, welding and assembling parts, while military officers and scientists ran countless tests on the newly developed systems. "Captain Grant," came a voice behind him. He turned to find Dr. Olivia Daniels approaching, her face a mixture of exhaustion and determination. "The crew is assembling. We've finalized the team. You've got engineers, scientists, security personnel. Everyone's ready." Lucas nodded, though the thought of sending untested people into the unknown unsettled him. "I'll be briefed on the personnel roster later. Let's focus on getting the engines running. The Aruki don't have much time." As they walked toward the command center, Lucas caught sight of a few of the crew members gathered nearby. Some of them were engaged in hushed conversations, while others stood apart, their faces drawn with anxiety. The fear of the unknown hung in the air, thick and palpable. "Captain," said Lieutenant Hayes, stepping up beside him, "how do we address the crew's concerns? We've got a good mix of people, but some are struggling to grasp the full scope of this mission." Lucas gave her a thoughtful look. He knew the crew would need more than just orders. They needed to understand what was at stake. "We don't have the luxury of uncertainty. This mission is bigger than all of us. I'll address them myself. Let's make sure the briefing is tight and focused." Inside the command center, Lucas faced the assembled crew. Their faces were a mixture of hope, skepticism, and quiet determination. He met their gazes, taking in the gravity of the moment. "The mission we're embarking on is unlike anything humanity has ever attempted," he began, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "We're not just going to another star system. We're going to save an entire civilization. The Aruki have asked for our help, And we've answered. But we have no guarantees, no safety nets. The room fell silent as his words sank in. This won't be easy, Lucas continued, his eyes locking onto each of their faces. There will be challenges, there will be risks. But we're here because we're the best humanity has to offer. We've been chosen for this mission because we have the will to face the impossible. And if we stay focused, we can do the unthinkable. His gaze swept over the room, seeing the tension in their eyes slowly begin to shift into resolve. We're in this together. We are humanity's answer to the impossible. Outside, the desert winds kicked up dust as the horizon loomed against the darkening sky, its unfinished frame now an embodiment of humanity's last hope. But in that moment, Lucas felt something rare, a flicker of optimism. Against all odds, they might just pull this off. Time was running out. The mission was just beginning. "All systems green," came the voice of Lieutenant Sarah Hayes, her words brisk but infused with a sense of quiet excitement. The horizon stood poised on the edge of Earth's atmosphere, its engines crackling to life as the final countdown echoed through the ship's corridors. The launch window had arrived, and, with it, the moment humanity would breach the stars. Lucas Grant stood at the command center, his face as unreadable as ever. But his heart was racing. This was it. The first step toward answering the Aruki's desperate call. The engines roared with intensity as the horizon pushed off from Earth's surface, the tension in the air thickening. Outside the viewports, the curvature of the planet shrank rapidly, swallowed by the infinite black of space. The ship trembled under the force of its ascent, but it held steady. Its trajectory locked firmly toward the Aruki system. Lucas clenched the armrests of his chair, eyes locked on the laser plasma display that flickered with data streams. Speed, fuel, trajectory, everything was functioning as expected for now. "We're in the clear." Paul Carter's voice came through the comm system, calm despite the monumental task they had ahead. "FTL engines are stable, it's working, Captain." The word working had never felt so loaded. Lucas nodded sharply, his focus never wavering. They had just launched and already the tension was building. The Aruki were waiting. He could almost hear their silent plea. But the calm didn't last long. Hours into their journey, as the horizon sliced through the dark void, something began to shift. The steady hum of the ship's systems began erratic, and Lucas caught a flicker of warning lights on the edge of his display. At first it was subtle, a few minor glitches, system errors that could easily be dismissed. But then the failures grew. The life support systems began to stutter, fluctuating in and out. "Captain," Paul's voice crackled over the intercom, his usual composure replaced with a sharp edge of concern. "We're seeing irregularities with the oxygen scrubbers. They're overloading. We need to isolate the power flow before it becomes a bigger problem." Lucas stood, eyes scanning the heads-up displays. "How long do we have?" His tone was a mix of urgency and control, his mind already calculating the quickest course of action. Paul's voice was strained. "A couple of hours at most. I'm rerouting power, but it's going to take time. The system wasn't built to handle these kinds of demands." Lucas swore under his breath. Every second counted, and they had just begun their journey. The weight of the mission pressed in, harder than any physical force he had ever felt. He turned toward Sarah, whose hands were flying across her console, coordinating the team as the clock ticked down. "We need to maintain full pressure in the cabins," Lucas said, his voice low but filled with purpose. "Get every crew member in full gear, no exceptions." Hours later, the initial failure with the life support system was contained, but new issues began to surface. As they traveled further from Earth, the distance between the ship and its home grew, along with the silence. There was no going back now. Their communications were delayed, and each transmission from Earth grew fainter. It took longer for messages to come in, and with each missed update, the anxiety among the crew began to rise. In the crew quarters, the isolation began to sink in. People spoke less, their voices softer. Small groups formed, while others withdrew, caught in their thoughts. Some had begun questioning their place in this monumental task. Were they truly ready for the unknown? "I don't know about this," whispered Dr. Olivia Daniels one evening as she worked late in the med bay. Her tired eyes reflected the stress of the mission. "We've barely scraped the surface of what's coming, and already, I feel like we're losing control." Lucas had been pacing the command deck, his fingers tapping the edge of his console as he listened to the concerns from the crew. He didn't show it, but the same doubts gnawed at him. There were no easy answers, no guarantees, but the Aruki were counting on them. And Lucas would see this through, no matter the cost. Then, without warning, the atmosphere on the ship shifted again. A strange signal echoed through the communications system. A burst of static, and then the faint outlines of a formation. The laser plasma display blinked, and a new set of coordinates popped up. Ships. They were ahead. And they were not Aruki. "What the hell is that?" Sarah's voice shot through the comm system, a mix of disbelief and alarm. Lucas moved swiftly, bringing up the heads-up display on his terminal. The formation was too organized to be a mere coincidence. The ships were moving in tight formation, likely military grade, and closing in on their position. They didn't respond to the horizon's hails. They didn't even acknowledge the human ship's presence. It felt like a trap. "Evasive maneuvers now," Lucas barked, his voice cold and commanding. The ship veered sharply to the left as Sarah activated the evasive protocols. "We're not ready for this," Paul's voice came through, his frustration clear. "We haven't tested the defensive systems properly. The Aruki didn't mention anything about enemies." Lucas's jaw clenched as he stood by the bridge's central console, watching the ships grow larger on the display. "We're not here to pick a fight, but we won't sit back and let them pick us off either. Evasive maneuvers and prepare the weapons systems. Sarah, engage shields." The crew's first hostile encounter in deep space was unfolding, and the tension was immediate. The unknown ships drew closer, their designs unfamiliar and hostile. Their weapons systems were now fully visible, dark shapes gleaming against the blackness of space. Lucas could see the faint flicker of energy pulsing toward them. "Captain, they're locking weapons onto us," said John Dawson, the security officer, his voice filled with urgency. "They're targeting us." The tension in the control room was palpable, a quiet but unmistakable fear growing among the crew. Their first test had arrived, and it wasn't just the Aruki they had to contend with. This was real. They were alone in the vastness of space, facing enemies they knew nothing about, with no way of knowing whether they would survive. "Hold steady," Lucas commanded, his voice carrying a calmness that belied the intensity of the moment. "We're not running. Stay sharp, everyone. Let's see what they're made of." The ship's engines surged as the horizon swerved, narrowly evading the first volley of energy blasts from the unknown ships. The tension was electric, but Lucas kept his focus. There was no room for fear now. They were at war. The ships pursued, but the horizon's maneuvering capabilities, though untested, were proving effective. The enemy ships fired again, but this time the horizon's shields absorbed the blasts, sending ripples of energy across the hull. The ship's systems groaned under the pressure, but the crew held their ground. "We've made it through this round," Sarah said, her voice tense but relieved. "They've backed off for now, but I don't think they're done with us." Lucas nodded, but the weight of the encounter lingered. "We'll be ready for whatever comes next," he muttered, staring out into the abyss. He knew this was just the beginning. The vibration beneath Lucas Grant's feet was different now. It wasn't the usual hum of the ship's engines, nor the subtle creaking of the hull as they cut through deep space. This felt like a tremor, a violent jolt, shaking the very foundation of the horizon. The suddenness of the disruption left the crew on edge, alert and waiting for the command to act. "Report," Lucas barked as he moved swiftly to the console. His team was already scrambling to find the source of the issue. He didn't need to see the growing worry in their faces, he could feel it in the room. Something was wrong. "Life support is going offline," Sarah Hayes' voice came through the comm system. "I'm getting readings that shouldn't be possible. The auxiliary engines are failing too?" "Can we fix it?" Lucas asked, his tone sharp. "Not without isolating the problem." "The system has been sabotaged," Sarah answered, her voice now laced with disbelief. "This wasn't an accident." Lucas's jaw tightened. Who would do this? His words were barely a whisper, but the question hung in the air like a storm cloud. The crew had already been under immense stress, but sabotage? This changed everything. Minutes later, the entire crew was on high alert. Paul Carter, the chief engineer, worked feverishly, hands moving over the displays as he tried to pinpoint where the fault originated. His eyes were wild with frustration as the pieces of the puzzle refused to fit. The damage was intentional, Paul said, wiping sweat from his forehead. It's in the propulsion system. Someone disabled the fail-safe switches and rerouted power to the wrong conduits. They wanted this to happen. Lucas clenched his fists, his mind racing. He knew the sabotage was just the beginning, but who would betray them, and why? The atmosphere on the ship shifted. It was no longer just about surviving the dangers of deep space or helping the Aruki. Now they had an internal enemy, someone who could tear apart everything they had worked for. And time was running out. Later that evening, the ship's security chief, John Dawson, gathered the senior officers in the conference room. Lucas took his place at the head of the table, his brow furrowed in concentration. "We need to find out who did this, now," Lucas said, his voice calm but filled with an unspoken fury. "We can't afford distractions. The sabotage is serious, but it's not the only problem we're facing." John nodded. "I'll start the investigation immediately. We'll search every section, interview every crew member. Someone on this ship is working against us." As the investigation began, Lucas and his officers turned their attention back to the Aruki. The communications delay had grown longer as they ventured deeper into space, but even with that, new intelligence had started to trickle in. It was subtle at first, small pieces of data that didn't quite match up with what they'd been told. Lucas stared at the display in front of him, the data points slowly coming into focus. The more he looked, the more questions arose. "Telly told us their population was 3 billion, said Paul, his voice tense. "But these calculations don't match up. There's a massive discrepancy between their reports and the actual numbers." "What do you mean?" Lucas asked, his gaze never leaving the screen. "According to these readings, there's more. Much more. Possibly 8 billion. And there's something strange about their resource projections, too. This isn't just about saving lives. There's something else going on here." A sinking feeling settled in Lucas' stomach. The Aruki had been clear about their urgency. They needed help to escape their dying star. But this was something else entirely. The closer they got, the more it felt like they had been misled, and Lucas could feel the walls closing in. The investigation continued, and the crew became more paranoid by the hour. Whispers of sabotage and conspiracy spread like wildfire. Tensions ran high, and Lucas had to walk a fine line between maintaining order and not letting fear take root in the hearts of the crew. One evening, Dr. Olivia Daniels approached Lucas after a long shift. Her eyes were tired, but her voice was steady. "I've been analyzing the biological data the Aruki sent us," she said quietly, glancing over her shoulder as if to ensure no one overheard. "There's something off. Their physiology. It doesn't make sense. They claim they can't imagine violence, but their biology is designed for combat. Their genetic makeup suggests a history of war, a history they haven't shared with us." Lucas's pulse quickened. "You think they've been hiding something?" Olivia nodded, her expression grim. "I do. We've been fed a carefully constructed narrative, Lucas. There's more to this than saving a dying species." The next morning, the sabotage took a new turn. During a routine check of the ship's computer systems, security discovered something far more sinister. Encrypted messages, sent and received by one of the crew members. The signals traced back to a shadowy faction within the Aruki, a faction that had been planning something far more dangerous than a simple evacuation. Lucas was in the command center when the report came in. His eyes scanned the display, his breath caught in his throat. The encrypted messages were clear now. Someone on board had been in contact with the rogue faction of the Aruki. They had deliberately engineered the sabotage to disrupt the mission. The Aruki weren't asking for help. They were manipulating Earth into becoming pawns in their factional war. "Who's the traitor?" Lucas asked, his voice a low growl of anger. John Dawson stepped forward. We're still working on it, but the encrypted messages came from Dr. Samantha Wells' terminal. The revelation hit like a punch to the gut. Lucas had known Samantha. She was an expert in alien communication, trusted by the UN and his own command staff. She had been instrumental in decoding the Aruki's distress signal. But now? Now she was a potential traitor, involved in something much darker than anyone could have imagined. We need to confront her, Lucas said, his jaw clenched. And we need to do it carefully. If she's working with the Aruki, then we've got a much bigger problem than we thought. The confrontation with Dr. Wells was inevitable. When Lucas and John entered her quarters, she was packing, her eyes wide with fear, but the cold determination in her posture betrayed her actions. Dr. Wells, Lucas began, his voice sharp, you've been compromised. We've found the messages. Samantha's eyes flickered with panic, but she quickly masked it. You don't understand, Lucas, she said, her voice steady but filled with a strange urgency. The Aruki didn't just need our help. They wanted our involvement in something else. Something that could change the balance of power in their world. So you've been aiding them in their war, Lucas concluded. You put us all at risk for this. Samantha's shoulders slumped. I didn't want this, but the rogue faction, the ones in control, they have a plan. A plan that involves humanity's technology to tip the scales in their favor. We've been their unwitting tool. Lucas's gaze hardened. The betrayal cut deep, but the mission had to continue. We'll deal with this. The priority is the Aruki. We'll stop the rogue faction, but we can't afford to lose focus now. The crew was shaken, but the horizon continued on its course, barreling toward the unknown. Tensions were high, trust was thin, but the mission still had to be completed. The Aruki were counting on them, even if their motives were less than pure. Lucas knew that in space survival wasn't just about fighting external enemies, it was about fighting the demons within as well. The Aruki system unfolded before them in a chaotic, almost surreal tableau. Lucas Grant stood at the command center, eyes narrowing as the horizon approached the dying star that would be the center of everything they had come for. But this wasn't a calm, scientific mission anymore. It was a race against time. A race through one of the most dangerous environments they had ever encountered. Solar flares lashed out with violent energy, streaking across the black void, and debris fields, remnants of shattered moons and dying planets, drifted dangerously close. The horizon, though built for speed, was pushed to its limits. Captain, we've got incoming. John Dawson's voice cut through the tension, urgent and sharp. Aruki warships, multiple signatures, closing fast. Lucas's heart skipped a beat. They had known there would be resistance. But seeing the enemy ships on the heads-up display, coming at them with such aggression, made it all too real. The time for peace talks was over. The Aruki weren't just trying to escape their doomed star, they were fighting to protect their last chance. Prepare for evasive maneuvers, Lucas commanded, his voice steady but cold. The crew sprang into action, their years of training kicking in. Paul, get the FTL engines prepped. Sarah, ready the shields. We're going to need everything we've got. The horizon bucked under the force of an initial hit, the hull groaning under pressure. For a split second, Lucas felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He had always known that the stakes would be high, but now, they were facing an entire fleet of Aruki warships, determined to defend their territory. Shields holding at 85%, Captain, Sarah reported, her voice tight with concentration as the laser plasma displays flickered. But we're taking direct hits. They've got advanced weaponry. We're not equipped for this, Paul muttered, his voice grim as he stared at the ship's schematics. Their weapons are tearing through our defenses faster than expected. Lucas clenched his jaw. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a test of humanity's ability to adapt, to innovate, and to outthink an enemy that had been preparing for this moment far longer than they had. As the Aruki ships closed in, the crew worked as one, their movements synchronized, each person fully aware of what was at stake. Captain, said Paul, his hands flying over the display controls. We can't keep absorbing these hits. We need to fight back, or we'll never make it to the Aruki homeworld. Then we fight back, Lucas said, his voice low but firm. Sarah, target their engines. Disable them, not destroy. We can't risk blowing up their ships and making this worse. Yes, sir, Sarah replied, her eyes locked on the ship's sensor readings. The display lit up as the horizon fired, each shot calculated to cripple rather than kill. The space between them and the Aruki warships became a frenzied blur of movement and explosions. The battle raged on, moments of brutal intensity punctuated by brief lulls of silence as the crew took stock of their damage. The horizon had endured hits from plasma cannons and electromagnetic pulses, each more dangerous than the last. It was clear now that the Aruki were not just defending themselves. They were fighting for their survival, in a way humanity had never experienced. Lucas paced the bridge, his mind working at a frantic pace. His thoughts went to the larger mission, the evacuees who were counting on them. Could they really continue down this path, risking everything? But as he looked around the room at his crew, he knew that there was no turning back. They had to make it through, no matter the cost. Status on their ship movements? Lucas asked, his eyes darting from screen to screen, searching for any advantage they could gain. They're adjusting course, John answered, his voice sharp. It looks like they're pulling back, but they've got reinforcements en route. This could be a trap. Lucas nodded grimly. Then we break it wide open. They want us dead, and they'll keep coming. It's time to show them why they shouldn't underestimate us. As the battle continued, it became apparent that the Aruki warships were getting more aggressive. They were no longer just defending. They were retaliating with an intensity that showed they would not allow the horizon to reach its goal. But humanity had something the Aruki didn't. Ingenuity. Captain, the enemy ships are focusing fire on our weak spots, Sarah said, her face pale with the effort. We can't take much more of this. I recommend full evasive maneuvers and a counterattack. Lucas glanced at the heads-up display again, his mind spinning with possibilities. He could feel the weight of his choices settling on him. Each decision they made now had the potential to tip the scales. Prepare the counterattack, Lucas said, his voice commanding but filled with a sense of finality. We're not backing down now. We're going to hit them where it hurts. The seconds stretched as Sarah executed their evasive maneuver, the ship groaning as it banked sharply to avoid another direct hit. At that moment, Paul triggered the ship's pulse cannons, the weapons aimed precisely at the enemy's engines. A brilliant flash lit up the space ahead, as the pulse weaponry discharged, striking the Aruki ships with such force that one of them detonated in a brilliant explosion, sending shockwaves through space. But victory was bittersweet. The enemy was not backing down. Their relentless pursuit continued, and Lucas knew that they could not afford to keep fighting without an endgame. It was time for a sacrifice. We've lost too much. We can't keep fighting like this, Paul said, his voice pained. If we keep this up, we'll lose the mission. And our lives. Lucas looked around at the crew, each person battered but determined. We've come too far. We're not losing it now. He turned to John. Get to the auxiliary system. It's time to pull the plug on their reinforcements. We need to stop their communication. John nodded grimly. On it, Captain. You'll have what you need in 5 minutes. In the midst of their preparations, an alarm blared through the ship. The threat from the Aruki warships had escalated. Their reinforcements were too close. It was then that Lucas saw a familiar face on the monitor. Engineer Karen Lewis, her face determined, her hands wrapped around the controls of a dangerous system. I'm volunteering for this, she said over the comms, her voice resolute. I'll get you the power to finish this. You can count on me. No, Lucas said sharply, the realization dawning on him. It's too dangerous. But Karen had already initiated the countdown. There was no turning back now. She was going to initiate the self-destruct sequence in one of the backup engines, taking out a critical portion of the Aruki fleet with her. Do it, Lucas said, his voice heavy with the weight of the choice. And may it be enough. The blast was deafening, its impact reverberating throughout the system as Karen's sacrifice carved a new path for the horizon. The Aruki ships faltered, their cohesion shattered. And in that moment, Lucas knew what they had to do. Prepare for the final push, he said, his voice low but filled with iron resolve. We've won this battle. Now we take this to the next level. We'll finish the mission. As the Aruki ships fell back, Lucas looked toward the stars, knowing that their journey was far from over. But for the first time, there was a glimmer of hope. The stars outside the horizon seemed to burn brighter, their distant light illuminating the creeping darkness inside Lucas Grant's mind. The battle was over, but the lingering question gnawed at him. The Aruki had survived, but at what cost? There was something wrong here, something deeper than just a dying star and a desperate plea for help. "Captain, you need to see this." John Dawson's voice was tense, cutting through the hum of the bridge as he beckoned Lucas over to the main console. The laser plasma displays flickered, and the data streams painted a far more disturbing picture than they had expected. The numbers, the readings, the communications, everything they thought they knew about the Aruki's predicament had been a carefully crafted lie. Lucas stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the rapidly scrolling data. "What am I looking at, John?" "It's their war, sir," John replied, his voice edged with disbelief. "It's not just a dying star. They've been fighting the Varth, their neighbors, for years. This whole evacuation, it's not just about saving a species. The Aruki are looking to expand their empire, and they need Earth's resources to do it." The words hit Lucas like a punch to the gut. For weeks, they had believed they were helping a species on the brink of extinction. But now, it became clear that the Aruki's call for help wasn't driven purely by survival. It was a strategic maneuver to regain strength in a war they were losing. "Explain," Lucas demanded, his voice low, controlled. "The Aruki have been hoarding resources," John continued, pointing to the data. "This wasn't just a request for help. They've drained their reserves, fighting the Varth, and now they need us. They want our technology, our fuel, our supplies. They've been hiding the full extent of their losses." Lucas stared at the screen, the realization settling in like a lead weight. The Aruki weren't as desperate as they had claimed. They were desperate in a different way, one that involved manipulating Earth into fighting a war they never asked to be part of. This wasn't just about saving the Aruki. It was about ensuring the balance of power in a galactic war they had no right to drag Earth into. "Get me Paul Carter and Dr. Olivia Daniels," Lucas ordered. "I need a full analysis on this. We need to know everything." Minutes later, Lucas was seated in the conference room, the laser plasma display in front of him showing the full scope of the Aruki's hidden agenda. Paul Carter, chief engineer, stood at the display scanning the data. His brow was furrowed in concentration. "It's worse than I thought," Paul said, shaking his head. "The Aruki have been using subterfuge, manipulating their own people and us. If they get their hands on Earth's resources, they'll have enough to outgun the Varth and anyone else who stands in their way." Dr. Olivia Daniels, who had been standing at the back of the room, stepped forward. "Their bioengineering is far beyond ours. They've been building weaponry in secret, hidden within their medical research programs. They wanted us to believe that their need was purely humanitarian, but this is about creating new weapons." Lucas's fingers tightened around the edge of the table, the weight of the decision bearing down on him. "So they've been using us as a pawn in their war, and we were too blind to see it." Olivia's gaze softened, but her voice remained steady. "We didn't have all the facts. We were told they were on the brink of extinction, but we failed to ask the right questions. We've been manipulated, just like they manipulated their own people." Lucas took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. He had to make a choice. The mission had started with good intentions, to save a species on the edge of annihilation. But now, the stakes were much higher. Earth was being dragged into something far more complicated than he had ever imagined. "Tell you what we're going to do," Lucas said, his voice now sharp with resolve. "We'll expose their lies. We'll take them on their terms, and if it comes to a fight, we'll be ready. But we're not letting them use us as pawns." The mission changes now. As the crew gathered to reassess their strategy, the gravity of their situation weighed heavily on them. They had been lied to, manipulated, and now they had to face the consequences of their blind faith in the Aruki's plea for help. Tensions were high as everyone sat around the table, their faces grim. "Captain," Paul began, breaking the silence, "we can't just turn back now. If we stop helping them, the Varth will destroy them anyway. They've made their choice, but it's not just about them anymore. We have to decide what we're really willing to sacrifice." "I didn't come all this way to turn back," Lucas said, his eyes scanning the faces of his crew. "We're here to help, but not at the cost of our own survival. We'll finish what we started, but on our terms. The Aruki will have to come clean with us." The next few days were a blur of strategy meetings and intense planning. Lucas and his team began to shift their approach. The full extent of the Aruki's deception wasn't just about their survival. It was about their quest for dominance. The crew had to be prepared for the possibility that the Aruki weren't the allies they appeared to be. As they began preparing for what was sure to be a final showdown, Lucas couldn't shake the moral dilemma that had been gnawing at him since the beginning. The Aruki were ruthless in their pursuit of power, but was Earth prepared to pay the price to stop them? The question loomed over every decision. "Lucas, we need to decide what comes next," Olivia said one evening, her voice soft but urgent. "We can't keep dancing around this. The Aruki have their own agenda, and if we stay any longer, we risk becoming part of it." Lucas turned to face her, his mind racing with the weight of it all. "I know. We're not just fighting for survival anymore, we're fighting for the future. For Earth. We need to make sure they don't use us to fight their war. We can't afford to hesitate," Olivia added. "We need to stop them before they get too strong." As the final battle preparations began, Lucas stared out the viewport of the horizon, the distant Aruki homeworld growing larger by the moment. The time had come to make the ultimate decision, to help the Aruki, knowing their true intentions, or to pull back and protect Earth from becoming a casualty of interstellar politics. The choice was clear, but the consequences would be far-reaching. The countdown to the final confrontation had begun. The crew was ready. Now, all they had to do was survive long enough to expose the truth. The air was thick with tension as Lucas Grant stared at the heads-up display before him. The Aruki homeworld loomed ahead, its surface scarred by the tremors of an unstable star and the chaos of an escalating war. The crew of the Horizon had come too far, fought too hard, and lost too much to turn back now. The final battle was upon them. "We're not just fighting for survival anymore," Lucas said, his voice steady as the crew gathered around the command center. "We're fighting for the future of the Aruki, and for our own." "Captain," Sarah's voice crackled over the comms, "we've got incoming. Varkt, reinforcements. They've come for us." Lucas glanced at the display. The Varth fleet was massive, its ships closing in fast. But the crew had made their decision. They would not back down no matter the cost. The Aruki were counting on them. The universe was watching. "Prepare the Horizon," Lucas barked as he gripped the edge of the console. "Sarah, target their engines. Paul, we need the FTL drive at maximum capacity. This is our last chance." The crew sprang into action, their movements swift and practiced. Lucas felt the weight of the mission settle into his bones as he surveyed the room. There was no turning back now. The Horizon was their last hope, and every person aboard knew it. The aliens. The battle erupted like a storm. The Horizon's pulse cannons fired in rapid succession, each shot aimed at the approaching Varth warships. Explosions lit up the darkness of space, sending shockwaves through the vacuum. The Aruki had been forced to defend their homeworld, but it was clear that their technology was no match for the Varth's relentless aggression. "We're taking heavy fire," Paul shouted, his voice strained as the ship shuddered from another blast. "Hull integrity is holding, but we can't take much more of this." Lucas remained focused, his mind working in overdrive. "Sarah, hold the line. Paul, reroute power to the shields. We need to keep them from getting too close." Despite their best efforts, the Varth ships continued to advance, their weapons pummeling the Horizon. But Lucas had a plan. He knew the key to surviving this fight was not just firepower, it was strategy. The crew had been trained for this moment, and they would use everything they had to outmaneuver the enemy. "Prepare to engage at close range," Lucas ordered. "We need to get in close, disrupt their formation." As the Horizon neared the Varth fleet, The battle grew fiercer. The Aruki homeworld was a distant blur now, and Lucas knew they had to make their move before it was too late. The crew was already stretched thin, tired, injured, but determined. They had one shot, and they would not waste it. "We're in position," Sarah said, her voice tight. "Captain, I've locked onto their flagship. We can disable their command center in one hit." "Do it," Lucas said, his voice low but resolute. "Make it count." The Horizon's cannons fired once more, this time with devastating accuracy. The pulse of energy struck the Varth flagship, causing it to stagger and falter. For a moment, it seemed as if the tide might turn in their favor. But the enemy wasn't finished yet. "They're regrouping," John Dawson reported from the tactical station. "Varth ships are pulling back, but more reinforcements are on the way. This isn't over." "Get ready for Phase 2, Lucas said, his voice steel. "We're not stopping until the job is done." The battle raged on, and with each passing minute the Horizon's crew was pushed to their limits. The Varth ships were relentless, adapting quickly to their tactics. The crew was exhausted, their nerves fraying, but Lucas refused to let them falter. "Captain, they're overwhelming us," Paul said, his voice filled with urgency. "We need to pull back, regroup." "No," Lucas cut him off, his eyes locked on the display. "We push forward, we fight for the Aruki, we fight for Earth. This ends now." With every word, Lucas's determination grew. He knew the cost of this mission, the lives lost, the sacrifices made. But he also knew that if they didn't stand firm now, all of it would have been for nothing. The Aruki needed them, and they would not fail. A loud explosion shook the ship, knocking Lucas off balance. He gripped the console, his mind racing. The Horizon was taking damage, but they had to push through. The Varth were not going to give up without a fight. "Captain, we're losing critical systems," Sarah said, her voice strained. "Life support is down in sections 4 and 5. We can't keep this up." Lucas looked around at his crew. They were battered, bloodied, but still standing. The room was filled with tension, but also a deep, unspoken resolve. This was their moment. They had trained for this, fought for this. The time had come to finish what they had started. "We've come too far to quit now," Lucas said, his voice steady. "Paul, can you reroute power to the life support?" "I'm on it," Paul replied, his hands flying across the controls. "John, get to the defensive systems," Lucas continued. "We're not backing down. The Aruki need us to finish this." The final push came in a blur of light and sound. The Horizon barreled forward, dodging incoming fire and unleashing everything they had left. In the chaos, Lucas's tactical brilliance shone through. He led his crew with a steady hand, his decisions precise, each one calculated to ensure their victory. The Varth fleet staggered under the relentless assault. With their flagship disabled and their forces scattered, the Varth began to retreat. The Horizon had won, but at a cost. "Captain," John's voice broke through the noise. "We did it. The Varth are pulling back. The Aruki homeworld is safe." For a moment, Lucas allowed himself to breathe. They had done it. But the victory felt hollow, the price too high. The aftermath was a quiet kind of chaos. The battle had been won, but the cost had been immense. The crew of the Horizon had lost friends, comrades. Some had given their lives to ensure the Aruki's survival. As Lucas stood in the command center, watching the final remnants of the Varth fleet retreat, he felt a pang of sorrow. The mission had been successful, but the sacrifices weighed heavily on him. "We saved them," Lucas murmured to himself, his voice soft. "But at what cost?" The room was silent. His crew was exhausted, their faces marked by the battle. But they had done it. They had saved the Aruki, and in doing so they had ensured their own future as well. The mission had ended, but the journey was far from over. The battle had ended, but the war within Lucas Grant's mind had only just begun. Standing at the viewport of the Horizon, looking out at the Aruki homeworld, he could still feel the heat of the explosions, the rush of adrenaline that had carried them through the battle. But now all that remained was silence. A silence filled with the weight of the choices they had made, and the consequences those choices would bring. "Captain, the reconstruction efforts are proceeding as planned," Commander Sarah reported, breaking the stillness. "The Aruki have already begun to rebuild their infrastructure. Their scientists are working with our engineers to adapt Earth's technology for their needs." Lucas nodded absently. "How are the survivors?" "They're rebuilding their cities, but it's going to take time. The damage to their culture and civilization is immense," she replied, her voice steady but tinged with the gravity of the situation. The Aruki had been saved, but at what cost? Thousands of lives had been lost during the battle. Their planet, their civilization, had been torn apart, only to be reborn in the aftermath of a war not of their choosing. Lucas had done what he could, but he knew the rebuilding process would take far more than just the physical structures. It would take years, decades, to restore what had been lost. Meanwhile, aboard the Horizon, the crew began to process the aftermath. Each of them had sacrificed something, some more than others, but they had all given a part of themselves to this mission. It wasn't just the physical wounds, the exhaustion, the sleepless nights. It was the emotional toll. The camaraderie, the bond that had formed between them, would be something they could never forget. "We've lost so much," Dr. Olivia Daniels murmured, gazing out at the Aruki's burning skies. "But we saved them. We did what needed to be done. But at what cost?" Engineer Paul Carter's voice was barely above a whisper. He leaned against the bulkhead, staring at the heads-up display as he ran his fingers through his thinning hair. "How much of our humanity did we trade for their survival?" Lucas didn't have an answer. He hadn't expected the journey to be easy, but he hadn't expected it to be this costly either. The Aruki had asked for help, but the help they needed was not just physical. It was spiritual, emotional. Humanity had become a symbol of hope, a beacon in the dark for a dying civilization. But that light had a price. The world around them, Earth included, was changing. For the first time in history, humanity had made its mark on the stars. They were no longer a fledgling species, a minor player on the galactic stage. They were now part of an interstellar community, a community bound by sacrifice and necessity. But with that newfound place in the galaxy came new responsibilities. Responsibilities that Lucas now had to face. "Do you think we're ready for this?" Sarah asked, her voice low. "I mean, what we've just stepped into. We're not just Earth's guardians anymore. We've taken on a bigger role. Haven't we?" Lucas met her gaze, his eyes reflecting the weight of their shared history. "No, we're not ready, but we will be. We have no choice. Humanity will adapt. We have to." Back on Earth, the world had watched as the battle unfolded, as humanity became the savior of the Aruki. But as the cheers died down and the celebration came to an end, the gravity of what had occurred began to sink in. The Horizon's mission had not been just a rescue. It had been a transformation. Earth was no longer isolated. They had become a player on a galactic scale, and that position came with its own challenge. "The Aruki are beginning to rebuild," Lucas reported in a meeting with Earth's leaders. "But we need to prepare for what comes next. They're a different species, but they're like us in some ways. They need our help to rebuild. And they'll need more than just technology. They'll need us to be there for them." "Do you really think they'll trust us after everything that's happened?" The voice of the U.S. president was filled with doubt. "We've done what was asked of us, but we don't know what they want from us now. Are we walking into a new war?" "I'm not sure what they want," Lucas admitted, his fingers tapping the edge of the conference table. "But we can't back down now. We can't undo what's been done. We have to move forward. Together. The Aruki are counting on us." The conversation shifted, and for a moment Lucas felt the weight of his own words. The enormity of their actions, the lives lost, the risks taken. They all seemed to blur together. Humanity had risen to the occasion, but the aftermath would leave its scars. He glanced at the faces around him, some hopeful, others uncertain. But one thing was clear. They were all in this together. "The world is watching," Lucas said quietly, his voice full of resolve. We've become more than just the saviors of the Aruki. We've become the leaders of a new era. We need to show them what that means. We need to rebuild ourselves, just like the Aruki. Later that evening, as the Horizon's crew gathered together, the weight of their mission hung heavy in the air. Each person had their own story to tell, their own personal sacrifices to account for. Some had lost family, others had lost themselves in the fight. But all of them had lost something. Lucas sat back, watching the crew interact, his mind racing. They had done the impossible. They had survived a battle that should have destroyed them, that should have torn them apart, and yet here they were, standing strong, unbroken. "We saved them," Paul said, his voice filled with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "But at what cost? A cost that will haunt us for the rest of our lives," Lucas replied, his voice tinged with sadness. "But that's the price we paid. For them, for Earth, for all of us." The crew stood in silence for a moment, each person reflecting on the journey they had undertaken. They had saved a civilization, but in doing so, they had changed the course of their own. And the question now was, what would they do with that change? As the Horizon drifted away from the Aruki system, Lucas stood at the helm, his gaze fixed on the stars ahead. The battle was over, but the journey had only just begun. He had led his crew into the unknown and they had emerged victorious. But as he looked out at the vast emptiness of space, Lucas knew that the true test was still ahead. The universe was no longer a distant dream. It was a reality, and humanity had a place in it. But would they use their newfound power for good? Or would the cost of their actions become a burden too heavy to bear? Only time would tell. But for now they had done the impossible, and that was enough. The Horizon hung motionless above the surface of the newly revived Aruki homeworld. For weeks, the crew had fought, sacrificed, and navigated through the maelstrom of battle and political manipulation, but now, finally, there was peace. The sky that once burned with the threat of an exploding sun was now clear, its stars twinkling with an almost surreal tranquility. Yet, beneath the calm surface, there was an unspoken understanding. The mission was over, but the journey had just begun. Lucas Grant stood at the command center of the Horizon, looking out through the transparent viewport. The Aruki planet, once a desolate husk, was beginning to show signs of life, but the cityscape he saw below was no longer just a reflection of a civilization recovering from devastation. It was a symbol of something greater, an alliance. Earth and the Aruki had come together, bound by their shared history and their mutual need for survival. "It's official," Commander Sarah said, walking up beside him, her voice filled with quiet pride. "The Earth-Aruki alliance is sealed, the first of many to come." Lucas nodded slowly, still gazing out into the infinite black of space. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. They had come so far, yet there was still so much left to do. The battle had been won, the Aruki saved, but what would Earth's role be in this new, expansive galaxy? What did it mean to be a part of something greater than humanity had ever known? "Yeah," he said finally, his voice distant. "But what does that mean for us? For humanity?" Sarah paused, watching him closely. "It means we're not just a species fighting for survival anymore. We're leaders, partners, and we have the chance to shape the future." Lucas turned his gaze to her, his expression serious. "We didn't sign up for that. We didn't want this kind of power." "No one ever does," she replied softly. "But that doesn't mean we're not ready for it. We've shown them what we're capable of. We've fought for a future, for all of us." Lucas glanced at the heads-up display in front of him, where a map of the galaxy lay. The Earth-Aruki alliance was being formalized as they spoke. Other species were starting to take notice, and in the distance, he could see the faint outline of other potential allies. New challenges were ahead, ones they could not yet foresee. The days passed. Lucas found himself reflecting on the choices he had made, choices he had not been prepared to face. Every moment of the mission had pushed him to the edge, forcing him to decide between the immediate survival of his crew and the larger moral dilemmas that had risen from their involvement with the Uruki. At times, it had felt like they were walking through a fog with no clear path ahead. Now, that fog had lifted, but the questions remained. He sat in his quarters, looking over the reports coming in from both Earth and the Uruki. The technological exchange was progressing quickly, but so was the realization that their responsibilities were expanding. Earth had been thrust onto the intergalactic stage, whether they were ready or not, and despite the success of the mission, there was a lingering unease within him. Was it the right decision to help the Uruki? Was there something they had missed in their analysis? Something more dangerous lurking beneath the surface of their new alliance? The soft chime of an incoming message interrupted his thoughts. It was from Dr. Olivia Daniels. Her face appeared on the plasma display, her expression neutral, but her eyes betraying the exhaustion of the past weeks. "Captain, I wanted to inform you that the medical efforts are going well," she said. "The Uruki are recovering faster than we anticipated. We're seeing signs of genetic stabilization in their population. There's hope." Lucas's heart lifted a little at her words. "That's good news." She nodded, but there was a pause before she spoke again. "But I also need to tell you that the long-term consequences of this mission are starting to show. Some of our crew members are dealing with post-traumatic stress. The emotional weight of what we've been through is hitting harder than I expected. We need to address it." Lucas sighed and rubbed his eyes. "I know. I've seen it too. I'll make sure we get the right support for them." "Thank you, sir," she replied, before the connection was severed. Later, Lucas found himself standing in the Horizon's mess hall, observing the crew as they sat, ate, and tried to find a sense of normalcy. He could see it in their faces. Some were smiling, others talking quietly in groups, but the tension never fully left. They had fought a war, saved a civilization, and now they had to face the consequences of their success. The mission had cost them dearly, and now the aftermath would shape them all in ways they had yet to understand. "What's on your mind, Captain?" Paul Carter asked, walking up beside him. His graying hair and tired eyes told the story of the long road they had all traveled. Lucas shook his head. "Just thinking about what comes next. The Uruki are safe, but the galaxy's a much bigger place than I realized." Paul laughed, though there was no humor in it. "You think Earth is ready for that kind of responsibility?" "I'm not sure, but we have to be. We don't get to go back to the way things were." As Lucas and his crew settled into their new roles within the Alliance, the future stretched out before them like an endless horizon. They had helped save the Uruki, but they had also become part of something far greater than they could have imagined. The Alliance was just the beginning. The galaxy was vast, filled with wonders and dangers that they had only begun to understand. There would be new enemies, new allies, and new challenges, and Earth would play a central role in all of it. The last day aboard the Horizon arrived with a sense of finality, but also anticipation. Lucas stood on the bridge, looking out at the star system before them, knowing that this was only the beginning. He had led the mission, but the future of Earth was no longer just his responsibility. It was the responsibility of all of humanity. "Sir, the fleet is ready," Sarah's voice cut through his thoughts. "We're ready to head back to Earth." Lucas nodded. "Set course, Commander. It's time to go home." As the Horizon turned towards Earth, its engines igniting to take them back, Lucas allowed himself a moment of peace. They had done what they had set out to do. They had saved the Uruki, and in doing so, they had proven humanity's place among the stars. But the questions that had lingered throughout the mission still remained. What would the future hold for Earth and the Uruki? Would they truly be able to coexist, or would new dangers arise to threaten their fragile alliance? As the Horizon accelerated into the depths of space, Lucas knew that these answers would not come easily. But for the first time in a long while, he felt hope for what lay ahead. There would be challenges, yes, but there would also be possibilities, and that, in itself, was worth fighting for.